Mark said, quote, "Like I always say, there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. They are nothing but puppets of the corporatists. President Joe Biden is no different, my friends. President Joe Biden is nothing but a corporate puppet. Joe Biden supported Bill Clinton's crime bill, giving too much power to the police force, leading to mass incarceration and boom of mega profitable private prisons. Police force has too much power over the people, leading to police brutalities and abuses. You can thank Bill Clinton and Joe Biden for that, my friends. Joe Biden supported the invasion of Iraq. Like I always say, my friends, war is a mega profitable business for the industrialists, corporatists, and corrupt politicians. Joe Biden is not your friend, my fellow immigrants from other countries. Former President Barack Obama and Joe Biden deported millions of undocumented immigrants in the United States. According to the report, 3.2 million undocumented immigrants were deported under the Obama administration, far higher than how many were deported during the Bush administration. If you are an undocumented immigrant and hoping for an immigration amnesty, forget it, Joe Biden is not your guy. Joe Biden supported outsourcing of jobs to third world countries. May I remind you, by the way, that former President Bill Clinton was the one who introduced China to the Global Trade and World Trade Organization in the early 90s. Joe Biden was delighted and fully supported the outsourcing of jobs overseas. China is a superpower today, and you can thank the Democrats for that. I will say it again, my friends, that the Democrats and Republicans are the same. They are nothing but corporate puppets. Unquote. Mark said, "Job outsourcing to poor countries like the Philippines is a fine example of crony capitalism. For example, an employer in the state of California has to pay his employees $12 per hour. So let's say an employee works 8 hours per day, 6 days a week. That is $96 per day, $576 a week. Plus, the employer needs to provide workers as compensation for his employees. Yes, hefty expenses on the part of the employer. For the employer to save money, he will outsource the labor job to a third world country like the Philippines. He just needs to pay a Filipino employee between $200 to $300 per month. Yes, just between $200 to $300 per month. They base the salary per month. No, not per hour nor per day. So let's say a Filipino employee works 6 days a week, 24 days in a month. It means that the employee is just getting paid $8.33 per day based on a $200 per month salary. What a huge saving for the employer indeed. My fellow Americans, the jobs that were supposed to be yours are gone. The jobs are gone, outsourced to poor countries like the Philippines. Yes, outsourced for very cheap labor cost. The jobs that were supposed to be yours are in the Philippines, and yes, the Filipino economic slaves are feasting on your jobs. Yes, the Filipino economic slaves possess your jobs, and they are exploited for very cheap labor cost. You see, my fellow Americans, I have nothing against fair capitalism. It's the crony capitalism that I despise. Mark said, quote, I couldn't agree more with Senator Sanders. The minimum salary wage needs to go up. Nothing is cheap in the United States, especially in the state of California where I reside. To be quite frankly, I can't comprehend on how ordinary and below the poverty line Californians survive economically. Nothing is cheap in California, especially housing. Yes, California has the most expensive housing in all the United States. Californians work as a slave just to pay high taxes, utility bills, and housing. I gave California as an example because I am Californian, but this goes for all the states. Yes, state and federal wages need to go up. Only a fool ordinary citizen would not agree with what I am saying here. Unquote. Mark said, quote, this is one of the many reasons why people don't like cops. One of the many reasons why people hate cops. I personally experienced racial profiling and abuse by cops in the United States. All the cops I have encountered in the United States were arrogant jerks. I personally tell my children to stay away from cops as much as possible. I tell them that cops can't be trusted and only call them in a desperate situation, only if really needed. I tell my children to walk away to a different direction when they see a cop on the street. It's a precaution because I don't want my children to become victims of police abuse and brutality in the United States. Unquote.
Mark said, quote, the State of Israel occupied the eastern part of Jerusalem and violated international treaty and law. Up to this day, Israel continues the occupation and continues the oppression and repression of Arab people. Israel declaring that Jerusalem is their capital is a slap and disrespectful act, right in the face of the Arab people. To make it worse, the United States supports Israel's demonic act and established a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. I am confused. Does the United States control Israel, or the Zionists in Israel control the United States? One thing is for sure though, that billions and billions and billions of U.S. taxpayers' money go to Israel every year. Unquote. Israel has been praised for its swift vaccine rollout, but the 4.5 million Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip have been excluded. Congresswoman Rashida of Michigan said, "I think it's really important to understand Israel is a racist state, and that they would deny Palestinians like my grandmother access to a vaccine." Congresswoman Rashida of Michigan is a Palestinian American, and one of the first Muslim women elected to Congress. It just reiterates what the Palestinian people, and even human rights groups have been telling us, that Israel is an apartheid state, Congresswoman Rashida added. Mark said, quote, "Yes, I agree with the Congresswoman and what the human rights groups say, that Israel is an apartheid state. Don't quote me out of context, my friends. I have nothing against the Jews and the people of Israel. The heck, I have a lot of Jewish neighbors in Los Angeles. I have nothing against them, but no one could deny that the state of Israel is an oppressive and repressive imperialist in the Middle East, 100% backed by the United States of America." Unquote.
Israel has excluded Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank and Gaza from its vaccine rollout, which has been faster than any country in the world. In failing to distribute vaccines to millions of Palestinians in the occupied territories, Israel is violating international law and denying its responsibility as an occupying power. Mark said, quote, "Listen folks, I have nothing against the Jews and the people of Israel. But the heck man, the state of Israel is a very suppressive puppet of the United States. Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza Strip are being oppressed and repressed by the state of Israel. I feel sorry for the people of Palestine. The current Prime Minister of Israel is nothing but a puppet of the United States. I am an American citizen and a huge taxpayer. It pisses me off every time I think that the United States sends billions and billions and billions of US dollars to Israel every year. Israel is the biggest bully in the Middle East, and it's because of the US taxpayers like you and I. Down with imperialism." Unquote. Mark said, quote, "Donald Trump is nothing but a coward. He was inciting riots and violence for weeks using his social media accounts. After the Capitol Hill riot, his devil horns went backwards to save his own skin, denouncing the rioters and white supremacist domestic terrorists' actions. Your idol Donald Trump betrayed you. In the end, he denounced all of you to save his own skin. Your idol Donald Trump is nothing but a traitor and a coward." Unquote.
Mark said, quote, "Yes, true. How come the United States has infinite funding for wars and military affairs, but has no fund for personal protective equipment for the healthcare workers? The United States has no problem bombing other countries, but seems not to care for the well-being of its citizens. Oh yes, the police. Look at the uniforms of the local police nowadays. They look like going to war, don't they? They are well suit up exaggeratedly from top to bottom, don't they? And of course, shoot first before asking, huh? Yes, many police officers are trigger-happy lunatics. The police's mentality should be, all lives matter, and not just white lives matter. Unquote.
Mark said, quote, "Yes, it is very true, unfortunately. The rich and the corrupt do not pay their fair share. It's the middle class who pay most of the taxes. The rich are tax cheaters, yes, but the poor also do not give their share, and I find it unfair. I mean, come on now. The poor can't have freebies all the time. The poor must also contribute to the society and economy. I do not agree with a tax bracketing system. I think it's unfair and unjust. I believe that there should be a fixed tax rate system. If I would become the leader of a nation, I would make it as a socialist nation. There would be a fixed tax rate of 60% for everybody. Everybody, regardless of status and class, will contribute to the society and economy. Yes, even the poor will contribute, and there are no exemptions. Your 60% tax share will fund universal healthcare, universal education up to college, food rations for the people twice a week, infrastructures for the people, and more. Yes, I mentioned food rations. It means, we the people will receive food rations from the government twice a week. Do you know where I learned this from? I learned about food rationing system when I went to Cuba. I learned a lot of good systems that benefit the people during my stay in Cuba. The Cuban socialist system taught me a lot of things that benefit everybody and not just the few. If I would become the leader of a nation, we the people will thrive in a socialist nation. Together, we are bonded for thrive, peace and prosperity." Unquote. Mark said, quote, "Please explain to me. How come the United States has unlimited money for wars and military affairs, but has no money for the well-being of its citizens? The United States spends trillions of dollars on wars, but there's no money for universal healthcare and free college education. How come? How come? I pay ridiculous amount of taxes to the city, the state, and to the federal every year. I pay huge taxes every year, but my family don't even get a free basic healthcare service. Whenever someone from us needs a healthcare service, I need to pay, using my own money from my pockets. Why is that? Please answer me, why is that? Our neighbor up north has universal healthcare. Yes, Canadians have free access to healthcare. The British, Germans, Italians, French and others have free access to healthcare services. How come we Americans are struggling to pay our medical debts? How come? How about education? I have a second cousin who lives in Sweden. For your information, she goes to college for free, subsidized by the government. And yes, there's even a money allowance every month from the government. Here in the United States, only a small number of the general population are able to go to college. College education here is very expensive, and many students are in deep educational financial debts. How come? How come? Healthcare is ought to be considered as a human right, not a privilege. Education is ought to be considered as a human right, not a privilege. Unquote.